scaling research perspective?
Yeah, so we had raised, well, first we were supposed to write the book on plasma. And every single time, remember I was a Bitcoiner transitioning into the Ethereum world, and every single time I finished writing a chapter, the research space had progressed enough that I would have to delete the chapter and rewrite it. And then 5 rewrites later, I was like, this is not what I got paid to do. 5 rewrites later, we were like, wait, this is definitely an implementable design. So we implemented it, we published it, we launched a testnet, we got all these likes on Twitter. I remember we had 1,000 likes. I remember screenshotting it to my parents and sending it to them. And it wasn't the same as product market fit. And so, you know, after like 3 months of our Plasma network, I was like, we've done it. We've scaled Ethereum. Why isn't everyone cheering? Why isn't mass adoption coming? And there had been a total of, I think, 4 transactions on the test network, and all 4 of them were our transactions. So after that, we went back to the drawing board, and we hit up some people at a firm called IDEO, and they introduced us to the concept of talking to your users. And it explains a lot about crypto. This is like a year into the development of Plasma. So for the very first time, we spoke to some users and we said, we've got theoretically infinite transactions per second. You just have to adopt this completely new Plasma predicate system, and you have to learn a new programming language, which we've just invented. And people were like, you know, I actually don't want to do that. I'm a product manager at Coinbase, and I've got a lot of shit to do, and I'm not going to rewrite all my contracts. We're like, okay, Uniswap. Like, Uniswap should be simple enough. And Hayden was like, bro, my shit is 100 lines of code. I'm not about to rewrite that shit in a brand new language. I'm doing just fine. My users are just fine paying the fees. And so we realized that what we had built was not actually what people wanted. There wasn't enough usage in crypto at the time to warrant having theoretically infinite TPS. What people wanted was cheap transactions and fast transactions. A single transaction averaged, you know, anywhere between like $5 and $25, depending on what was happening. So we went back to the drawing board, but the only problem was I had raised a total of $300,000 in grant funding, and it was enough to pay each of us like $40,000. Our office was my studio apartment in New York City. I lofted my bed. Everything under my bed was like my room, and we shared one IKEA table. And turns out, if you have kids, so like if you have any experience doing any kind of work, you didn't want to work for us. And I remember offering a very senior staff engineer $120,000 a year because I thought that that was a lot of money. And he was like, no, I'm thinking like $250,000, and that was crazy to me. So tried to raise another round of grant funding. Didn't work, which was surprising to us because Omise Go, this company that had raised $30 million in ICO funding, didn't want to give us more money. The other projects that had forked our code base, including Matic, which is today Polygon, also didn't want to give us grant funding. So how could it be? Did nobody want what we were building? So we went back to the drawing board and built out a demo of the first optimistic rollup with Uniswap. The idea was we needed one-click deploy. TPS was not the optimization target. We were optimizing for fast transactions, cheap transactions. And we demoed that. And we went and raised a round of VC funding. VCs were like, how are you planning to monetize? No idea, but all I knew was we needed to start hiring more than just 4 half-brained kids who didn't even have their frontal cortex fully developed and have never heard of a product manager before. And that's where we are now today, 4 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I saw the research side of this, right, is basically that in the beginning, there were state channels. Actually, Bitcoin came up with state channels first. It was just called payment channels, and then it was called the Lightning Network. And it turns out that the Lightning Network has a lot of problems, but then state channels in Ethereum, thanks to Ethereum smart contract properties, were more powerful. But even still, there is this problem that they only supported a very narrow class of applications. And then in 2017, Plasma came along, and Plasma like actually supported arbitrary scalability for payments. And so at first there was Joseph Poon's paper back in the summer, then there was a minimal viable Plasma, which is a post on ETH Research, and then Karl and I think on a train in France, came up with Plasma Cash, which is like Plasma but more scalable, right? Because like Bitcoin Cash is like Bitcoin but more scalable. And so But then even that still, like, it only supported payments, right? And then we went into this rabbit hole of like using RSA and like cryptography, and then we did Plasma Prime. But then eventually we got like to this point where we realized that like with the technology at the time, actually Plasma just could not be made to be general purpose. And that just became more and more obvious. And then at some point, like basically the idea of rollups started to come out, and like people just realized that doing a rollup that actually supports a full EVM was actually the obvious choice. And what I think is interesting, right, is like I think short term, like that was completely true, right? Because there was also this other project from 2020 called Loopring that did a ZK rollup using, that was like fully functional, like even got to stage 2 very quickly, very cheap, but then nobody cared because people did not want payments, people wanted the EVM. And so then stuff switched to the rollup direction, and then more recently we realized like, wait, ZK snarks exist, they're amazing, and like actually with ZK snarks there's a lot of Plasma stuff that you can do that was not actually possible before. So like I actually think there's a good possibility that in a couple of years things are going to go like fully full circle.
Yeah. Oh, and as you could tell, V was like kind of behind the scenes, like doing all these things. And one thing I remember, I was in a car, and we were like, and I was like, wait, so if you post the data in the call data, it like saves X amount of money, and then Vitalik was like, oh, I have this. That sounds like shadow chains, this thing that I wrote about in 2014. Anyway, it was a whole like a weird, melting pot of ideas and things that all, now we're here.
Personally, I feel like the entire industry is doomed to talk about the same like 6 ideas on like an 8-month loop to infinity. Maybe I'll be convinced that I'm wrong in a few years, but this is my current thesis, so just trolling a little bit.
Yeah, well, so I think switching gear a little bit, since Hayden cannot make it here, Uniswap also has a really interesting story, like Karl mentioned, but it may be one of the earliest and most usable applications, and there's a lot of MEV in there. There's a lot of how to build an application on Ethereum, like I would say lessons learned. So yeah, maybe I'll give it to V first because he's, I guess.
Sorry, what's the question?
Okay. I'll grab it. Basically, I mean, there is a untold Uniswap side of the story, which I told Hayden that I would also do, so I feel obligated to answer your question. I hope you don't mind. Which is that Hayden also was behind the scenes talking about this, and I talked about this in a presentation, DevCon like 4 or whatever. But basically, I remember many times we were in Brooklyn with Hayden, with the Uniswap team, going to their office saying, hey, check out our new design, and it's so scalable and it's so great. And as Jing said, it was a predicate design or whatever, and then Hayden was like, okay, but can it support Uniswap? And the answer was no, it cannot. And we went through design after design after design after design, and eventually we finally came to this, to the optimistic roll-up design, which actually could support Uniswap. And so Hayden and really the Uniswap team has been very much, kind of a guiding light for what it means to build a successful application, because Uniswap is a successful application that has users. Surprise, surprise, not like our Plasma design. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, one other fun thing about Uniswap is I think there's this other even deeper rabbit hole where the ideas came from, right? Which is the whole theory of automated market makers, which before was actually backported from prediction markets, right? So basically what happened was that people were thinking about prediction markets all the way since the 1980s and 90s, and then one problem that they faced is situations where they wanted the market to stay liquid even in the face of relatively few users, and they wanted a way for people who are publicly interested in learning the outcome and willing to pay for it, a way to subsidize the market. And so out of that, there were these ideas that were called market scoring rules that were basically like the equivalent of making an infinite number of infinitesimal bids and asks at every price level, right? And if you actually like do the math on this, this just converts into like very basic functions. There's one that's called the logarithmic market scoring rule. There's one called the quadratic market scoring rule. And I knew about these because I was a prediction market fan. And then at some point, this idea clicked, and I wrote this Reddit post that basically said, let's run on-chain decentralized exchanges the way that we run prediction markets. And the idea there was, well, there were on-chain dexes before. They used order books. They had horrible spreads. They were ugly to use. And so let's like use this idea of like just having an on-chain curve that you can like buy and sell along, and let's figure out the curve. And then I wrote this post, and then about 6 months later, I wrote another post basically defending why you can't like drain the thing of money. And then about a year later, like basically Hayden came along and like that actually became implemented, right? And then of course, since then, like and then prediction markets themselves turn into designs where like you just issue tokens and you just have an AMM between tokens. So like everything went full circle multiple times.
I'm sorry, I got too excited, but just as all good ideas are recycled, the good idea of building an X times Y equals K market maker was really Vitalik being like, Karl, this is very obviously something that needs to be built, and no one is building this idea that I have. And I'm like, oh, well, I happen to have someone, as Jing said, who's right there for it. So anyway, good old V.
I was actually very offended by the early Uniswap designs, because I was like, oh my God, these people, they want their like kind of libertarian like info prediction markets so bad that they're not thinking about the consensus consequences of exposing all this MEV and what it's going to do to validators, stake centralization over time, kind of concentration to places like Wall Street. And I sent Vitalik like a super angry rant. It might have even been all caps. I don't have it anymore because I used to run my own email server, and that got nuked by a third-tier VPS provider. But that's its own rant. But I was like, wow, this is horrible for consensus. Like, how can we advocate this design? This is literally unlimited MEV per block. Like, the entire liquidity, the entire like order flow. It's like, it could not be worse. Like, can't we do something more like the Ether Delta design with like a little limit kind of system, maybe an off-chain component? It's not great. It's a little more centralized, but it's at least how we know how to solve the problem right now. And it doesn't expose infinite MEV the way this design was. And I think Vitalik sent back one line. He was like, well, we can maybe just consider this fees for our users to have their transactions executed. And I was super offended. I was like, what do you mean fees? Like, how do you extract this? How do you like blah, 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 blah? And I think now what we have in production is UniX, which in some ways was like my original suggestion to them to what to do instead. When they launched it, I was like, what are you doing? Like, you finally fixed all the problems with like the old design. It's finally convinced like me that it's the right thing. And now you're going back. Like, so yes, TLDR, I do feel like we're just circling like the same four things. We're probably going to see permissionless AMMs come back at some point. This is kind of like a call to the room in various settings. This is my opinion, that are kind of even decoupled from L2s completely. So sorry, optimism, but it's going to be both. So that's my trolling today.
Yeah, so, well, speaking of things going back in circles, that Robin Hanson today or these past 48 hours just launched a prediction market on Ethereum, right? It's kind of crazy. And to think about how the real world is, impacted. Well, I guess we are in the real world. So speaking of that, I know V needs to bounce at some point. Skedaddle, I have no idea what that is. Okay, it's cool kids say that. So maybe I'll leave you with two questions, and the other panelists can continue to remain on the hot seat. What are the cool applications? If there are 8, name all 8 of them. If there are more that you have recently came to realization, please share them. And also maybe just share your definition of decentralization, since we are at the Ethereum Decentralization Night. and leave everyone here with an open challenge.
Okay, so for applications, I think, this is the year of caring about users, and so I'll name the last 8 applications I actually used. So, let's see, ENS, Polymarket, of course. Let's see, Railway. Just like ETH as a payments mechanism. Okay, what else? I guess, Farcaster, yes, 5. That's not an application. That's an L2. Okay, now I'm trying to think. 5, then there's the question of like, are swapping applications or are they infra? Okay, let's like count them as an application. I think I'm trying to remember if I used like Uniswap or CowSwap or Kyber. I think ultimately I used the Rabby interface, and so I don't know. So 1/3 of a point for all 3. Okay, that's number 6. Wow, what else do I remember actually using? Which part of Gnosis Safe? Is that an application or is that infra? Okay, fine, it counts. Gnosis Safe, okay, that's also an application. And okay, great, I need number 8. Wow, thanks. You guys are actually like, that's not an application.
Is Dogecoin an application?
No. Okay, wow. It's like, now we're gonna ask like, are meme coins an application? But,
well, are they?
Okay, so is that last round of selling meme coins to pay for charity, like, is that an application? I don't know. Okay, that's number 8. Okay. Okay, so those are the 8. Okay, definition of decentralization. I think, when I think about decentralization, I generally think about like maximizing the number of independent things that have to fail for a system to break, right? And so like that thing, it could include obviously a number of different people that have to collude for a system to break. It could even potentially include like geographic decentralization, so number of countries that need to go crazy for a system to break, or number of companies. It could include number of software implementations. So I think like number of things, and like especially number of like uncorrelated things that need to that need to break for your application to break is like the intuition pump, and you can get the different types of decentralization out for architectural, political, logical, and so on out from below that. And last one is a call to action. So I think mine is just like basically like don't think about what is a mature space in 2024. Think about what is a new space in 2024. Think about what is in that same situation today that Plasma and Optimism and Uniswap were at back in 2018. What is in that same situation where nobody has any friggin' proof that you can make profit off of it. It's something that still appeals to basically computer geeks and people who love math and people who love ideas. But something where if you make the right idea, like it is something that is just this missing thing that could suddenly really bring, like the next level of power to the whole ecosystem and potentially create like the next wave of problems. So, figure out what it is, hopefully avoid creating problems, and like go and biddle it. So.
Do you have any free gifts for unbuilt ideas?
Okay, as they say, gift is the German word for poison, so be careful with that one. Yes, you can check, look it up. Okay, actually, yeah. So, okay, gifts. Okay, so one category of idea that I think is interesting is, back in 2018, there was this like fun application that you could use where it was solving the problem of like getting people to sign up for meetups, but like not having this situation where like 100 people sign up and only 30 people come, and like you don't know how many people come. And the way that it worked is like basically you had to put down a deposit, and it was like a small deposit, like maybe 0.02 ETH to sign up. And then if you don't come, you lose your deposit, and if you do come, you get back your deposit plus a share of the deposits of people who didn't come, right? And like this actually got used and like basically people like signing up for Ethereum meetups like actually became reliable. And I'm not sure why people ever stopped using it. It might have just been like crappy UX and crappy fees and problems that don't exist anymore in 2024. So I think that kind of idea is worth bringing back. Another class of idea I think is like what I call like multi-commitment mechanisms. So basically imagine like each individual person puts down a deposit, but they don't put down a deposit for one event. They put down a deposit for an entire class of events that they're willing to participate in. It could just be a list of events. It could potentially be something more complicated, like combinatorial academic fancy people can figure out the optimal version of this eventually, but you could just make it a list at the beginning. And then you could have people that propose events, and when they propose events, then like they would also specify a minimum number of people that would need to come. And then if there is an event that has enough people who have capital that where they specify conditions that say that they're willing to participate, then all of their deposits get like yanked immediately, and then the event gets turned on and it happens. And so basically you have this like very capital efficient way to just like very quickly gather up capital for like arbitrary events. Could be meetups, could be pop-up cities, could be eventually like building entire cities if like we have another couple of bull runs. And like basically allow this stuff to happen without requiring like some centralized actor in the middle to take on all of the risk. So random fun idea. You figure out if it's like poison or if it's cool. I think it's cool. So enjoy.
All right, well, feel free to skittle, whatever that word is, but skedaddle. But oh wait, Jing, you are not done because you're here to scale Ethereum, and yeah, we have more questions. Yes, so we have more questions about scaling Ethereums for our optimism friends. So, take a couple step back. There's a really cool hipster application called Uniswap that Phil does not approve because of this concept of MEV back in the days, and rented as an advisor against building it, but then it was built. So, and then I saw MEV auction as the defining early blog post. So how did all of this like come together? Does anyone know where to start?
I'm going to front run it to just say MEV auction is hot again today. Like it is everywhere right now. I mean, it had a quiet moment, and it's the same reasons it offended me back then a little bit. I'm sorry, Karl. Like I love the idea. I just thought the execution it could be like a little more efficient in some ways. Is the same complaints I have with it now. So I'm again stuck in the same 8 idea loop. But I think that was a good one. It was kind of like the idea of like, okay, if we do want to have this vision where the MEV is useful and it's not this purely negative thing and it's going to exist anyway, how do we use it for something that's actually good or that we like or that like feels good and makes sense? And maybe I'll let Karl and Jing speak to the specifics.
Actually, Phil hated it so much that Flashbots exists now. Yay! So, I mean, Miva, as we wrote about it, is unimplemented. So what is it about the execution that you take issue with, and what have you done differently?
Yeah, so I think the hard part is like when you have an auction that's happening for something in the future, it's a very different market structure than like a mechanism that's expressing current real-time value as an oracle. It's like a very different set of actors that end up participating, and it's a very different like way you participate. And my thesis at the time was like it would be hard to like actually play this auction in a way that wouldn't be centralizing to basically the people who control this pot to be distributed, this like kind of power in the system. Specifically, like there's some recent posts that we have out of Flashbots about a priori auctions and the trade-offs, how you price them, how that changes based on like volatility, based on your signals, based on what kind of trader you are. It gets much more into those questions, which I felt at the time were like not answered in a satisfying way for like L2 or L1, versus like I think the Flashbots philosophy was more like let's accept some centralization because we need to build something that isn't just like a validator hedge fund. But let's try to get to this economic mechanism that gives us the properties we want, which is kind of this permissionless oracle for real-time MEV, where anyone can come in at any point in the process, whether or not they've like won an auction, whether or not they've like participated in a previous step, and kind of express their value if the system has time to process it. To me, that's like the holy grail of MEV mechanisms in action. And if you're excited about that, come see my DevCon talk tomorrow, because it will be featuring that and many other spicy takes. Did that answer the question, or was it unsatisfying?
I mean, I have more questions, but maybe I should just go to your talk tomorrow.
So I guess a couple more questions here. So why did you guys choose not to build Miva back then? And like 2019, 20-ish?
Well, there was no value to extract yet. So we wanted to build the chain and then like put shit on it that you could use, and then there would be something valuable, and then Miva would be more of an issue. And turns out building the chain infrastructure is actually really fucking hard. And so it's cool that you see all these chains popping up here and there today, and that there's so many forks and different companies that are iterating on top of the OP stack with a different set of features or a different set of assumptions or a different proof system. But the fact that they can do that with the 6-month development cycle is because we did the 6-year development cycle building that in the first place and MIT licensing it. So now the question is, we're coming back into the zone, as Phil says, of discussing the same dumb ideas every 8 months, but I think we make progress on the ideas every single time they do cycle back around. Yeah, maybe if my hair were longer, I'd have a more cynical take. But I think, now there's value, and one thing that we didn't expect was that people kind of enjoy running their own sequencers. And so is that like user research is really difficult to conduct because there's this kind of like sex appeal about running your own infrastructure. Like you show up to the conference and you're like, yeah, we run our own sequencer, and people think you're cooler, genuinely, So do people actually want to be running their own sequencers? When our customers propose new features, they're like, yeah, we want to change the size of the mempool. And it's difficult to ask the like 7 levels of why to get to what they really want, which is almost always cheaper fees, more gas, faster transactions. And so, previously we thought Miva would, the assumption that Miva made was that all sequencing rights would kind of accrue in this big pool, like a Bitcoin mining pool, and like tons of different miners from all over the world, extractors from all over the world would come and bid on the rights to sequence out of this pool of computation demand. And we're not really sure if that's the case. Different chains want different sequencing policies. It's a lot of fucking work to build out a marketplace, and nobody seems to need it quite yet.
So that was quite a journey. Thanks for sharing that. So maybe just taking one step back. If I recall, Karl, when I first met you, you wouldn't stop ranting about the internet government and amongst many other things. Sometimes I forget that, that was a defining moment for me. And so also like your rapping is just like, world-class freestyle. That needs to happen at some time. But so like, what is really optimism scaling, and like what is the reason why you're still building after so many years and things are, hard and challenging and like 8-month cycles and whatnot. I want to give this mic to Ben because you have observed this dream or vision coming to life and still going this journey.
So the question is, what are we all building for? I mean, there's a few levels of, and it depends on how AI doomer you are. There's like, if you take an extreme Karl stance, it's something like, we are in a race to align humanity before superintelligence comes owned by an unaligned human. So like, there's one answer at that level. I think maybe like a more measured answer is that it's about solving the tragedy of the commons within the context of funding public goods. Like, Jing told a lot of the story before about our early days and our struggles to work as a nonprofit. And like, that's just what we were. We were this little ragtag nonprofit group. Like, hey, can you please donate some money and we'll produce, good papers on ETH Research. And it's very apparent that that doesn't scale. And quite frankly, I think if you look at like the Ethereum industry, the Ethereum ecosystem today, we have a lot of places where we are falling back into the trap of extractive Web 2 plays, where we would like to be having a new form of Web3, nirvana, call it what you will. But at the end of the day, it's because the business model of writing open source software is very hard. Like Blockspace and like kind of like the core of Blockspace is like one category of public good that has kind of broken that trend. And in some ways, the goal of optimism is to take that trend, which we've broken, where we have a source, because even though Blockspace is open source, it turns into one sort of scarce resource of the Blockspace. We have to use that to extend into the rest of the world so that the entire internet can just be open source apps running wherever the fuck you want.
Well said. Well, oh, okay.
Maybe I'll just back run open source and free software. That's one thing we don't do enough as a community. End rant.
That was quick. So I think that we're almost at the end of the panel. And I know that it's called Decentralization Night, but I think there is some quite centralizing operators in our space, ourselves all included. And we got to do better than that. So what's our commitment to decentralization? And also, what do we view each other's role in the Ethereum ecosystem towards the decentralization of Ethereum?
Sorry, so the question is, what is our commitment to decentralization, and what are the others' roles? For optimism, it is about decentralizing the block space, which means decentralizing proofs first and foremost. So there's the concept of stages in the rollup world, stage 0, stage 1, stage 2. You've heard these things. If you don't know what they mean, effectively, stage 2 means it's actually decentralized, and stage 1 means we're not confident enough in the security to really turn over the kind of keys to the kingdom, as it were. So, I don't know, the most important role that optimism plays is to fulfill that. This requires not just the proof system that we launched earlier in the year, but multiple redundant proof systems that are themselves each individual public goods, basically built in a clean room, so powerfully different that there won't be an intersection in bugs. So, yeah, that's our thing. And y'all can take care of the ordering stuff.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Also, public goods, decentralizing access, or access to funding for public goods.
Karl?
Y'all covered it.
So this is also going to be in my DevCon talk tomorrow, so shout out, attend that. I think there's a few things we need to achieve to really get to decentralization from my perspective. Like, from my perspective, what matters is decentralization of power, specifically economic power, kind of against the world that we are already building inside and already exist within. I think there's some key pillars that are required to have that happen. One is distribution. So this is kind of the multi-proof, multi-implementation. I consider this like basically technical decentralization. Like, we have 3 copies. There are many repos. There are more devs, as Vitalik was saying, more doors to knock on. I think another piece relates to MIVA and why I didn't like MIVA. It's the permissionlessness of the market. So to me, that means having a competitive market where the barriers to entry are low and don't require some sort of like moat, some sort of backroom deal, some sort of real world advantage that you already have. And then I'm going to leave the rest of the properties to your watching of my talk tomorrow, so it'll be a surprise, but it'll be spicy. I'll give you a hint. If you know me and have been paying attention at all, you can definitely guess at least one of them, and it has a formal definition that's pinned to my Twitter. So I think there's a lot we need to do, and the question is, how do we actually escape these power structures? I think there's a few keys. I think geography is one that Vitalik mentioned, for example. I think privacy is another one. How do we use our information, build the kind of ETH decentralization I don't like saying mafia because that's a bad word, but union, the ETH decentralization union. Although people don't like it when I say that either, for various kind of collective. Okay, people don't like it when I say that one either. So we'll find a word. Togetherness of decentralization.
I forgot one of our contributions to decentralization is enabling the Uniswap team to contribute to decentralization with Unichain and all of its very sick sequencing decentralization advancements. Let's go Uniswap.
Yeah, well, on that note, we can never decentralize, no matter how far we go on the infra side, without decentralizing order flow. And hence the shout out to Uniswap, now becoming Unichain, enabling more innovation, and hopefully itself will have its own decentralization journeys, soon TM. And so if you care about concretely what you can do about decentralization, there is a sidecar stage. When you first entered this beautiful infinite garden, you may have passed by a garage, a parking lot, where there is a bunch of contributors just putting the whiteboards up. So there, we will have we'll spend the rest of our night with those who care about programmable privacy and care about using it to accelerate Ethereum decentralization. So on that note, we will have some high notes hit by Ben Jones and Georgios, who was also a former Plasma Group contributor. Forgot to shout out that. But they will be on their guitars and keyboard. And the songs are a secret right now, but they're some sort of a parody. So just I will be looking forward to those who can figure it out and post it on Twitter. All right. Thank you, everyone.
What's going on, y'all?